All right, guys, good to see you again. And this time we are jumping into a subreddit that I actually kind of like. It's a work from home subreddit. But within this subreddit, you'll see some interesting phenomenon. And, obviously, this whole culture, this whole idea of work from home, and now the culture that has arisen as a result of that, that didn't really exist prior to COVID-19. And obviously, since it is in recent memory, office jobs and mandated 5-day office work weeks were fairly normal, fairly common. Ever since this shift to either hybrid work or remote work, you've seen this this sentiment pop up where people are they've become very attached to this idea of working at home, and you'll see the same points made over and over again, and really it all boils down to this: I prefer working at home because in an office, despite being supervised and despite being in a collective work environment, I actually get less work done and I'm distracted more often. And you'll see that point made, and you'll see these people argue that, and they will die on that hill. That is kind of a core theme, a tenet of this subreddit. But that's the argument that's made kind of on the surface in order to sort of lobby their work from home preferences. And hey, I'll be the first to admit work from home is awesome. And on days when I'm able to work from home, obviously it's much more comfortable, it's much more convenient. You can take the liberty of doing things that you might not otherwise be able to do within your house. Do a chore that needs to be done real quick. You don't have to necessarily get dressed or make yourself look presentable in front of other people. And people get accustomed to this ritual of work from home, especially during the whole coronavirus pandemic. And what you now see is a large number of people, predominantly residing in the subreddit, that are really, there's no going back. And you couldn't convince them in any way, shape, or form that an office setting might have not only some benefits, but might, have benefits that a work from home environment doesn't necessarily offer. And I don't think you could necessarily convince these people that that's the case. So the kind of interesting phenomenon to look at is when you hear those arguments made, and then you actually scroll through what is being said and the conversations that are being had, and then you see something like this, which is kind of it's like an admission within the echo chamber, because again, these people feel, they're posting in an environment where they feel comfortable, and where they're going to get responses from people who think the same way as them, or at least identify with the work from home label. But this person is openly admitting, read the title: does anyone else have days they don't do much work? And it's the predictable items. Sometimes I'll be sad, anxious, extra tired, and I push off meetings or whatever till later in the week, or do the bare minimum and just relax/do chores instead. Sometimes I won't start work until 10 or even take the whole day. Salary employee. Hmm. I feel guilty doing this instead of working on my projects, but sometimes I really just don't have it in me. My manager doesn't pay attention to if I'm working or not. And I make up for the work later in the week, so haven't had consequences yet. But the guilt's still there, and I wonder if I'd be much more productive if I didn't do this. But my motivation and mental health, because it can just feel so low sometimes, I need a break. Does anyone else do this or feel this way? All right, and within that, like, single paragraph, there's enough information for us to make a few deductions, to draw a few conclusions. So first of all, the fact that the person mentioned multiple times that they do feel guilty, it indicates that they know, like, at least to some degree, they're not doing the work that they should be doing, and they're salaried, so they're getting paid, and they're pushing back meetings, and they're deciding to prioritize, personal things, and even just relaxing, is what this person said. So that guilt, what that really is the conscience, and the acknowledgement that they are taking advantage of their work from home situation. And following that, you might say, all right, well, maybe there are disadvantages, or maybe there are reasons I can see for my employer wanting me in the office, maybe even a couple days a week. But then you see, following this, you see a sort of rationalization in, him saying his manager doesn't pay attention to if I'm working or not, so it doesn't really matter. And I make up the work later in the week, so it doesn't really matter. I haven't had consequences yet, so it doesn't really matter. But the guilt is still there. And then he goes on to say that my motivation and my mental health can feel so low that I need a break. So, I want to stop. Working's tough, working's hard. I'm exhausted. I want to relax. So that's another rationalization. So he's correct in the guilt that he's feeling, but then it's just he automatically explains it away because when you've taken on this label, this work from home label, and you make it your identity, of course you're never going to want to switch away from it because you've kind of romanticized it and dressed it up to this degree that it's like a lifestyle now. And so the comments, before we even read anything, I wonder if the comments will be an extension of that rationalization. Like, oh no, you're fine. Like, it's all right. Like, there's no way from them to know you're getting your work done, XYZ. As long as you're meeting deadlines, like there's always a rationalization for the sort of realization that the original poster had here. And for right here, this person saying, yeah, don't feel guilty as long as your work is done on time. It doesn't matter. But maybe you should feel guilty if you're doing those things. You're not doing the work you're supposed to be doing or you're getting paid to do. All right, here's another one. When you're on your deathbed, you won't give a crap about the work days you didn't give 100%. It's all good in the grand scheme of things. We are mere replaceable numbers. That's another rationalization. It's like, well, in the grand scheme of things, is you doing what you're supposed to do on a daily basis? Is you doing what you're getting paid to do, a salary? Does that really matter in the grand scheme of things? No. So, keep slacking off. That's what this person's saying. So, to answer the question, if there's anyone else that doesn't do much on some work days, this person answers yes. Did I do the same thing in the office? Also, yes. There are days that I'm expected to give 200% to do. So, this it's the same thing. It's a repetition of the pattern. Yeah, I do the same. There are days when I don't do much work, but there are days when I didn't do much work in the office. So it's all good. It doesn't really matter. Different employers have different policies, but I've been working remotely for 7 years, and I think this is completely fine. I figure if I work more some days and less other days, it will even out. If you're that worried about it, you could try tracking your hours to make sure that it's evening out. That you're working about 40 hours per week. That last part, that's probably a good piece of advice. And as long as you're doing that, if you are actually compensating for that work, then I don't think that really matters, depending on the type of work you do. But it doesn't really sound like that's what this person's doing. So it's actually not fine, like you say it is, because this person's starting work at 10 a.m. And missing stuff they shouldn't be missing, and making excuses because their employer isn't paying attention to them very closely. And on top of that, they're using like mental health as a reason for not working as much as they should, and everyone could use that as a reason if they wanted to. I do this on days when I don't feel well. The guilt that comes from it is hard to shake, but I try to remember that if I were in the office, I'd just be wasting time. So even that, like that, just every single one of these responses seems to be another rationalization after rationalization. With these individuals on this thread here, like they're admitting they have guilt, and they're admitting that the guilt is hard to shake, but then they're telling themselves things that make it all okay and make them feel better. That's a little now this is starting to look a little bit like, I don't know, the echo chambers we have been seeing. 8-hour workday is ridiculous, to be honest. If you finish all your work by deadline and you're responsive when people need you, who cares? Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're working an 8-hour day and you're getting all your work done, then wouldn't you just be working an 8-hour day? Because if you get 6 hours of work done, you'd be working a 6-hour day. If you're getting 10 hours of work done, you'd be working a 10-hour day. And if you're getting 8 hours of work done, you're working an 8-hour day. Unless you're saying you're basically just sitting on your computer not doing anything. And you're only, because I think pretty sure you're getting paid to work for the time that you're on the clock. And I think another rationalization, and I have some work from home friends, and it sounds pretty chill. Um, but I know for a fact that a lot of times what will happen is that unless there's an item that immediately needs their attention, like a deadline that's immediately approaching or a task that immediately needs to be completed, they're not really like working on anything else, and they're not really doing other things necessarily related to their job. They're just doing things they'd otherwise be doing if they weren't working. So they're doing personal things, and they're technically taking personal time. If that's part of the job, that's part of the job. But I don't think that's what you're getting paid to do. So there might be a misunderstanding between, and each contract is different, obviously. But we're seeing a pattern, and we're starting to see the same type of comment appear over and over. So I don't know how far we should scroll, but I just thought it would, this is an interesting kind of hypocrisy to point out, because if you know anyone, or if you've seen the um, arguments from the work from home community, you know that this is what these people say, that we're more efficient, we get more work done, and we waste less time. But when you really get into the spaces that they're in, and then you have conversations with them where they're being honest with each other, where they're being honest with you, then you'll hear them, say truths like this, right, where they actually don't do much work. And the reality is that the people in here actually won't acknowledge is that if you are in an office, you're probably getting that work done, because there is that top down pressure. There is that even social pressure from your coworkers, kind of a collective attitude, a camaraderie, if you will, around the work itself. And that can also be a good thing that isn't acknowledged within this by these work from home people, because when you embrace collaboration efficiently, like, you can work exponentially better. And not all of that can be done necessarily over Zoom meetings and text chats. And if you think that's the case, then okay, fine. But yeah, I think there's benefit to face-to-face collaboration and the social forces that are contained within that environment. I think that's a very important part of continuing to motivate you as well in a workplace. But just more of an ironic thing than anything else. Isn't too critical, just a little comical. Thanks again if you stayed to the end here. According to YouTube, that's about 4% of you. So yeah, I extend my thanks, and I hope I see you guys again soon.